Okay, so welcome to our first video in our course for spiral dynamics. Now, most of you probably opening this up going, what on earth is spiral dynamics? I know when I first heard the phrase, I thought that doesn't seem to refer to anything. And what spiral dynamics is a particular model of human psychological development. Now, developmental psychology is a very broad, complex field, and there are dozens and dozens of different models that can be found within developmental psychology. What I want to do before we go into all of that is just help give a bit of a framework of why we're looking at a model of developmental psychology. Why are we looking at something that seems in some sense to not be particularly relevant to spiritual development? And the reason is anyone that's been around for long enough should be self-aware enough to know that their psychological development will have a huge impact on their spiritual development. Okay, so we know that it's through renewing our minds, it's through changing the way we think that that we see everything. It's how we interact with everything. It's how we do everything. We let go of lies that we've believed in the past. We change those lies. We replace those lies with truth, and that changes our lives. It connects us with God, with each other, with ourselves. It has a huge impact on our spirituality. And so it's really important actually that we have a good grasp of our psychological development. And so if we were to look at why we would do this, it's so that we might know better who we are, we might know better the path that we're on, and that we might know better the path that others are on. And so I think it's really important that we do look at these kind of topics. I think it has a huge bearing on helping us understand the path that we're on. So spiral dynamics specifically is one of 70 plus different models over the last kind of probably the mid 20th century, probably the last 70, 80 years, maybe up to 100 years or so. Psychological development has been studied massively across pretty much every culture by masters of the topic, way more equipped than me with proper qualifications in human psychology and all sorts of different things. But what's fascinating is most of these processes started quite independent. These psychological development experts went and studied how children grew, how they developed, how their ways of thinking developed, how adults then grew and developed, how society upon that developed and changed. And they looked at what are the commonalities that we have, and can we track some sort of process that it seems that people develop. And so they can look at a small child and say, well, at the beginning they have no real concept of ego. They don't even know that they themselves are a person, that everything is the same thing, and then they get to sort of between 5 and 9 months and they start to tell the difference between, if I bite my finger, that's painful. If I bite a blanket, that's not painful. Maybe the blanket and my finger are not the same thing. And there's this development, there's this process in which we as humans develop. And that becomes obviously very basic, between knowing the difference between your finger and a blanket, all the way to very complex and nuanced, subtle distinctions that many people will die before they ever get to that level of development. Some people will not get as far as they might have got, or as others might get. So it's a very broad spectrum. But what's interesting is in the 70 plus different models that emerged over the decades of this being studied independently in different areas and different contexts, almost every single model has the same stages, the same points and reference points and areas in which people must go through before they can get to the next stage. They either are exact stages that correspond, or there's a big overlap. So there's maybe 5 stages instead of 7, but those 5 stages overlap the 7 or the 8 or the 4. Different people have different models with different labels. But it is fascinating that the general consensus amongst the psychological community is that there is a fairly linear path in which humans develop their psyche, the way that they think, the way that they understand the world, the way that they view the world. And so it's really quite profound, the fact that we can in some ways know how we will develop psychologically. We can look back at our lives and confirm it, but we can actually also look forwards and look at where we might be heading. Now that's not necessarily comfortable, and it's not necessarily something people are ready to accept. A lot of people can't, they aren't in a place in the way that they process, in the way they see things. They're not psychologically developed enough to accept what's to come. A lot of us don't like what's next, but we'll get there. I'm getting ahead of myself. One thing that we're going to find as I go through this is I've got oodles and oodles and oodles of notes. I've got over about 2,000 bullet points that we're going to go through, and each bullet point probably could be extrapolated into minutes and minutes of content, some of them hours of content. And so I'm going to try and be brief, but I am going to be referring to my notes, so it might be a little bit more stop-start than you're used to if you're used to my videos. I'm not just going to be rattling off stuff off the top of my head. I will probably be looking down, having a quick look at my notes every now and again. And so I'm just doing that right now as I preface that. But what is this particular model that I've picked? It's a model I've picked because it's quite easy to understand. It's got quite clear stages that we can implement, and I think it actually corresponds really well to a lot of people that are on the journey that has brought them to this website. A lot of people are here because they've deconstructed their faith. They're going through some heavy processes of removing beliefs that have turned out to be lies, that haven't turned out to be helpful, haven't turned out to assist them in connecting with God, but actually held them back from that. They're trying to reintroduce new truths. They're trying to restructure their spirituality, their faith. They're even at questioning, can I restructure? I think something like Spiral Dynamics can be huge for helping people like that see the path that they're on. Now, one thing I will say, this is true of all models of psychological development, is that none of them are complete. We don't know what's to come. You know, so the most advanced stages of psychological development today just weren't a thing 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. People couldn't get to that developed stage. They couldn't see the world in the way that we see the world today. And so there's ongoing development, and we see that more and more as time goes on, that we are not at the end of the process. No one has arrived. And so whilst I'll be sharing some of these processes, I haven't arrived. I am not at the end and have figured it all out. And so everything I share comes through my lens, and it won't be perfect. And I don't want you to think that it's perfect. I don't want you to think that I've arrived. As best as I can be self-aware, I will be as open as possible about my own journey and how and where I am on this stage, and where I hope to go, and also where I am certainly not yet. And so please don't misunderstand me and think that I've got it all figured out and I'm telling you from off on the distance, here's where to get to and here's how to get there. That's not what this will be, unfortunately. I wish it was. That's not what this is. Spiral Dynamics is not a system that is just telling you what you should be or how you should be. Actually, what most of these models of psychological development is equipping people to know that who they are is who they are. You can't be anything but who you are right now. Now, that's not to be the case tomorrow, perhaps, and we can give tools that might change who we become, but right now, you can only be the person you are. And so with all of this, it's really important that you don't establish a system of hierarchy in a sense that one place is better than another. That's not what this course is about. It's not saying one stage is quote-unquote better than another. Now, of course, as we develop and as we grow, we learn to do things more effectively. We learn to process things more effectively. We can connect with God perhaps more effectively, but actually sometimes evolving in these stages, moving on in these stages, sometimes there's elements which cause us to do some things worse. You see, that this process of growing, it's always expanding, it's always developing, and it grows upon what was the prior stage. It doesn't reject the prior stage, it builds upon the prior stage. But as it grows, as it develops, it brings in a whole host of new problems. And so as we grow, we expand, we develop, we find the limitations of the area we are in today, and we say, I've got to grow, I've got to get out of here because these limitations are holding me back. So we grow and we grow beyond the limitations. But what happens is the next stage brings its own new limitations that we will at some point have to grow and expand beyond. And so none of these stages is perfect. No one in any stage can look at another person and go, oh, you are beneath me, you are worse. That is not how spiral dynamics is meant to be worked, okay? So it's really important that you hear me say that. You're going to hear me say it a lot. And honestly, depending on where you are in the spiral, there is a good chance that you're not going to be able to hear that. You are still going to see a hierarchy. I know I still at times see a hierarchy. I've got to try really hard not to consider one stage better than another, not to consider myself better than the person in the stage I was in, 2 weeks ago. It's very hard until you reach certain stages that transcend seeing things in that way. Okay, so I'm giving you a framework. This is not about setting stages above one another and being better than others, but I'm also pre-warning you that you are very, very likely to do so. The odds are that about 1% of the population are in a place not to see things that way. So when I say this, I'm not speaking down to you because I'm in the 99 as well, but I'm saying that the vast majority of people are unable to not see that, okay? So I'm saying it as a warning that it's not about people being better than the other, but I'm also saying it's very unlikely that you and I are going to be able to see that easily, certainly off the bat, off the initial thrust of information. It's going to be very hard for us not to think of things very hierarchically, very better, worse, good, bad. That's a very natural tendency in almost every stage of the psychological development. It's quite late on in the stages that we start to let go of that way of perceiving things. Okay, let me just quickly check where we are in my notes. So the spiral dynamics, it's a tool to help us, and this is why I want to teach it, because I think it's really helpful. It's imagine you had a roadmap of where you need to go. If you were going on a journey, it's much easier than getting in the car and just following a few signs saying, oh, London's that way, and you kind of follow a sign and you hope to see the next sign pointing to London. It's much easier if you can just put it into the GPS and it tells you exactly the roads to take, the path to take. You can zoom out and look at where you're going. You know how long you've got to go. All of that makes things so much easier, doesn't it? And this is what spiral dynamics can do for our psychological growth, our spiritual growth, is it can give us a point of reference of where we are on this great roadmap of life and how far along we are, and what tools, what areas of study, what areas of experience do we need to move on into the next areas. And it also can help us try and be less judgmental about different stages. Because generally speaking, we demonize the other stages. And so we demonize what we've come from, but we also demonize where we're going. And actually demonizing where you're going makes it very hard to go there. Makes it very hard to grow into the person that you don't like. And so that often is the way it works, and I think we can all, if we have a moment of self-awareness and reflection, we can probably see that in the past we didn't want to become who we are today. We would have called who we are today a heretic, or a crazy person, or you're not rational, or you're just being rational, or whatever it might be. We might have all sorts of slanderous things to say about who we've become today. And it's because we weren't in a place to accept that. And so just knowing that that is part of the journey as we look at the spiral of spiral dynamics, it's really helpful because it causes us to reflect and take a pause before we demonize other people at different stages, because we may well become that person. We may well move into that stage, and actually they may well be someone that can bring us great wisdom and help as we grow. And so it's a really great roadmap in showing us where we're going. It also is a huge help to have a roadmap that we can look at as we help others, as we talk to others. Now, it's not a tool to manipulate others, to control others, to judge others and look at them. Oh, they're at that stage. Oh, I'm better than that, or anything like that. Again, the stages don't work like that. But it is amazingly helpful to know how someone is getting on in their growth. You can now know, oh, what would be helpful for them to grow next. Rather than assuming that what works for you will work for them, you now have a better understanding of where they might be, what might be helpful for them. You might understand the language that would help them. You might understand the scenarios that would help them. You know, rather than if someone came to you and said, I'm looking for a new church and this is where I'm at, you could look along the spiral and go, oh, it sounds like they're here and I'm over here. And so the church that I'm at, or the non-church that I'm at, if I'm not going to church, that's not helpful for someone that's here. But I think that church down the road, that might be helpful. And it gives you a paradigm. Or maybe they're asking you for advice on what to read and you're reading a certain book, but your book is way off in the future for them. They're not going to be remotely interested or ready to read that. And actually reading it might really cause them to dig in deep and fight growing. But actually you can think of maybe when you were at the stage they are, or maybe you can think of other teachers that are in similar stages or maybe slightly ahead. And so you can advise them to check out that might draw them forward and encourage them to grow. And so it's really helpful in our relationships with others. It causes less strife, less angst, less problems. Imagine sitting down for dinner at Thanksgiving and knowing where your family members are and knowing how to speak in a way that doesn't hurt them, offend them, cause them issues, but instead helps them grow, helps develop them, helps them become more healthy individuals, helps them develop spiritually and psychologically. That is an amazing gift, isn't it? I mean, just the thought of being able to do that rather than, I don't know about you, we don't do Thanksgiving in the UK, but they can turn into some interesting affairs, can't they, with politics coming up and all sorts of different things, and it becomes a nightmare. And this stuff works in every area of life, you know, see, because these are psychological developments, but societies and groups are made of groups of psyches. And so what's interesting is as we go through these stages, you'll see that they apply to individuals, but they also apply to groups of individuals. So families can be at certain stages. Businesses can be at certain stages. Countries can be at certain stages. Churches most certainly can be at different stages. And so it will help us relate with organizations. It will help us talk to our friends about different topics. You know, things like religion or politics are very complex and people get very offended about. It will help us understand when we understand what stages people are at and know how we might interact with them in a more healthy way. And so that's really why we're talking about spiral dynamics, what it's all about. It's so key, and it will help you as you grow, obviously, and that's the primary point, okay? So the one thing I want to say is I want to talk about what spiral dynamics isn't, okay? Because it's really easy for us to weaponize spiral dynamics. It's very easy when you start to understand how people grow that we turn it into a weapon. We turn it into a tool of judgment. We judge people for being at a certain stage. And like I said, 99% of people are not in a place to really fully live in the understanding that different people are at different stages, and that's okay, and no stage is better than the other or worse than the other or right. That's a very advanced position to be. It's very easy to intellectually understand that, but it's very hard for us to really live in that. And so it's something we have to watch as we're learning about this. As I'm giving you these tools, I want you to be constantly reminding yourself this is not a tool for me to judge other people. It's not a tool for me to use to manipulate other people. This would be very easy to use some of the things that I will teach in this that help you understand how people work, how people grow, how people develop. It would be very easy for you to use this to manipulate people, and that is not what I'm doing here. It's not what I'm interested in doing. I really hope that you have the heart not to do that as well. I can't obviously control you in that. I'm not going to manipulate you, but I hope that you would have the grace and the love to not apply this in any other way than to love people around you, okay? And finally, like I said, I've said it 100 times now already, and we're like only just beginning. This is not a tool to be a measuring stick to decide who's better or who's worse. Oh, you're at a later stage or you're at a worse stage. That is not how I want people to be thinking. Of course, we're growing and developing. Of course, a 20-something is more mature than a toddler. Of course. But of course, a 50-year-old is more mature than a 20-year-old. But is any of them better than the other person? They might be, a 20-year-old might be better at IT than a toddler or a 50-year-old. A 50-year-old might have a bit more wisdom in how the world works than the 20-year-olds, or certainly the 2-year-olds. So, of course, there's elements in which you could say in a very pragmatic and real sense, in a rational, tangible sense, that later stages are quote-unquote better, of course, but a toddler isn't any worse than a 20-year-old. You know, maybe some parents are thinking, no, they are. But a toddler is exactly who they need to be right now. They are who they need to be to survive, to grow, to develop right now. You know, if you got that toddler and you picked him up and expected him to act like a 20-year-old, you wanted him to get a job and provide a living for himself and cook and clean and do advanced calculus, that toddler would fail on every level, right? It would be a disaster, and it would probably end up dying in the corner because it doesn't know how to provide for itself. It doesn't know how to eat. It doesn't know how to cook. It doesn't know how to find food. Unless you put it in the fridge for him, maybe you might get that far. And so, you know, this isn't about better or worse, okay? So I really want you to understand that. An example that might help, I'm not making a pro-evolution statement here, but think of the concept of evolution. We would say that birds historically have come from dinosaurs, from reptiles. And so we look at a bird today and we don't say, oh, a chicken is better than a dinosaur, than a T-Rex. That's not true, really. They're just different, aren't they? But the truth is, T-Rexes aren't here today, right? They didn't work for today. At some point along the way, they didn't work. They didn't survive whatever happened to them. Again, looking through this model of evolution, whether you like it or not or believe it, it's an example, okay? So try not to get too put off by that. But the point is that a dinosaur doesn't work today, and chickens may not have worked back then. I don't know, but the point is that the chicken works now. It's what's needed at this stage. It needs to be a bit smaller. It needs to require less food. It needs to be able to fly or whatever it is, you know. And so remember it, and remember this over and over and over again. I'm going to remind you, but please keep this at the forefront. Write it on the wall and stick it on, write it on a post-it and stick it on the wall. You know, plaster it everywhere you've got. If you're making notes, make it at the top of all of your notes. The stages are not about being better or worse than one another, or there's no right stage and wrong stage. The right stage for you is the stage you are in, okay? I cannot stress that enough. It's so important that you understand that the right stage for you is, the stage that you're in. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few observations. Okay, so this is just an introduction video. We're just introducing some of the concepts, but I want to give you some observations about the stages before we go into them. Okay, so the stages you will find swing backwards and forwards in a sense. So the concept of spiral dynamics, and this is why I like it, is a lot of stages see each other almost as a ladder, and I think that can be unhelpful language. It's helpful in some senses because it is just climbing up, it's evolving, it's developing, it's growing, it's moving in a trajectory, but sometimes the ladder can just seem like a better than model, and especially since we're trying to fight that so much in our psyche, I don't like that as much. But the spiral, the concept is, if you think of circles within circles, you know, so if you have a circle in the middle, and that would be stage one. Stage two is a bigger circle with stage one in the middle. And it isn't over here, so you've got stage one and that's bad, and over here you've got stage two and that's good. No. Stage one is encapsulated by stage two. And stage two gathers up everything in stage one. It takes everything that's good and it grows beyond it. It expands to include more information, more capacity, more worldviews, more ability. Okay, and so Ken Wilber, who's very influential in my studies of this, and an incredibly influential person in this field, he has the phrase transcend and include. And so once you reach the maximum you can get out of your stage, you transcend it, but you do include it. You bring it with you. And we all know this, right? So when you move on, we can go back to toddlers learning trigonometry or something, you know. Toddlers don't learn trigonometry, you know. But once they get to 4 or 5, you might teach them a little bit of maths, maybe to count, you know. Then you start teaching them as they get a bit older. You can teach them, you know, some addition, maybe some multiplication, maybe some division. And then you start to teach them a little bit of geometry and calculus. And, you know, there's a progression, there's a path. But every new stage transcends and includes what it learned before. And even when you get to very late stages at university, perhaps you might learn that some of the things you learned earlier aren't quite right. They're not actually true in a very literal context, but it works and it's okay. And so we teach that to people that are less capable of understanding these really complex concepts. And so what we do is we transcend and we include. But as we include, we let go of little bits that aren't helpful, that aren't actually true, that aren't ultimately true. So we let go of that and clear it up and clarify it. And that's what's happening at this stage. In spiral dynamics, as we grow, we're spiraling upwards. So there's a momentum that is helping us grow and become better people and more spiritual and more healthy and better at relating and better knowing ourselves and acting and living life and how we operate in this world. It is an upward momentum. It's getting better, but it's not throwing out the past. It's bringing it up, it's transcending and including it. And so I want you to have that in the back of your mind, these circles that are included in the prior, in the next circle, we include the prior stage. And so think of that as lots of circles within circles. And that's what we're meaning when we say a next stage. We're not talking about going up a ladder of the rung and making the prior ladder rung irrelevant. It's very, very relevant. It's very important, okay? Now, here's some interesting points that will be very helpful as you learn. One of the things that's very interesting is that the stages are largely oblivious of themselves. They do not know that they are a stage, and they do not know about the other stages. This is what makes this such an important thing to learn. It puts you in the upper echelon of people that understand how humans grow, because most humans don't know they're growing on a path. They don't know that there's stages that we're aware of. They don't know which stage they're in and what stage they're maybe going to and what stage they've come from, but they do demonize all other stages than themselves. Okay, so we see this in all sorts of areas of society. We see, right-wing politics, left-wing politics. We see traditional Christian, charismatic Christian. We see, progressives and liberals and conservatives. And we see all these labels that we apply to different people that are often, they correlate to different stages at times. What's happening is people are demonizing stages that they've either come from or they're perhaps needing to go to. But very rarely do we demonize the group we're a part of. And that's because our stage is the only valid stage to us. Now, we're going to look at 6 stages. There's really 8 overall, but I'm going to leave the first and the last that we know of to the side, because they're largely not relevant to what we're going to be talking about in this course. And as time goes on, I might revisit and elaborate on some of the later stages. The first one is just not particularly relevant. It's called beige or archaic, and it's basically almost the stage of a baby that has no knowledge of self, no knowledge of anything beyond itself. It's just this one beingness, but not in a good, maybe enlightened, we are all one sense, but in an ignorant, we are all one sense. It's not out of a good sense, but it's actually full of ego. It's full of selfishness. It's full of all sorts of different elements. And so you think at the archaic stage, at this early beige stage, it's all about me. It's just, I'll scream until I get fed. I'll scream until I get my nappy changed or my diaper. I'll scream until I get, some sleep, or I'll scream because I'm not getting sleep. But it's very much just, there's no communication, there's no awareness of how to interact or anything like that. So as we look at that as how it applies to spirituality and things like that, it's not really particularly relevant. Very few people, if at all, are relating on spiritual levels at that level. Maybe some people, I don't know. So I'm just putting that to the side for now. But of the stages that we will talk about, these 6 stages, actually the first 5 stages are in the first tier. These stages are broken into 2 tiers, the first tier and a second tier. The first tier is completely unaware of the stages. It doesn't know about each other. It doesn't know it's a stage. It doesn't know the other stages. And so it's constantly fighting with the other stages. It's constantly resenting the stages that represent where it's come from. And it definitely resents the stages which it will ultimately have to grow into if it's going to grow and evolve and develop. And that can make it much harder to grow and develop. Now the last stage becomes self-aware. It's the first stage that goes, there's stages, interesting. Now it doesn't necessarily mean it has it all figured out by any means, but it helps it integrate its process. It helps it look back at its past and do that transcending and including. It helps it do that. And so just knowing about these stages helps and equips us to grow and develop. Now, as we look at the stages, what we'll find is they'll swing backwards and forwards a little bit. And so they swing from being very me-focused, very egocentric, to being very we-focused, very group-centric. And so the first stage we talk about is very group-focused. It's going to be a stage called tribal, and it's all about us. But then we go to warrior focus, and it's all about me, me, me. But then we go back to a traditional, and it's all about fitting in and the greater good of the group, and it goes back to group. And so we're going to see a bit of a swing backwards and forwards between me and the group, me and the group. And so look out for that. It can be very helpful to understand a little bit about your own psyche and where you're at. It can help you identify maybe somewhat where you are as well. The thing I want to highlight as well, and this is something that is going to be quite hard for people to accept, is you cannot skip stages. Now, I can't stress this enough, okay? The toddler doesn't get to be a 4-year-old from being a baby. They have to go through the toddler stage. They have to go through the stage where they learn their ego and they learn to scream no and throw tantrums and all that awful stuff, the terrible twos they call it, isn't it? They can't get past that without going through it. They have to learn all those things. They have to learn to say no. They have to learn they are an identity, that they're a me, that I can get my own needs if I communicate. I can get what I want if I scream and shout loud enough. You know, there's different elements of that, and we grow beyond it, but actually it's a key part. And actually there's areas of psychology where some people who are deeply narcissistic and have massive ego issues, they actually have to work with psychologists on their early years, the years between 2 and 4, because at that age they had some major issues that caused them not to develop beyond. And so part of their psyche is still fixed in that ego-driven, narcissistic stage. And so it's really important to go through these stages and develop and be healthy, because these people have become adults, they've grown in a lot of ways, but part of their psyche is still acting like a toddler. Now, I don't know if you've met any people like that. In my line of work, I occasionally get to deal with some pretty wild extremes as far as the beautiful multicolored spectrum of what humanity can look like. And I have met some people that are like this, and it's very, it's disturbing in a way to see people that haven't been able to grow and develop in a healthy manner. Now, these people hopefully get help. It's an amazing time we live in where we can get people to give them help and equip them and hopefully help them develop and grow and heal. And so it's not all doom and gloom. But this is an important part that we have to understand. You cannot skip stages. You must go through the stages in order. Now, someone that did an interesting study on this is a person called Gilligan. And she was a psychology researcher, and she specialized in feminine morality. And so she did a huge study on a vast amount of women on the topic of abortion. Now, I know I'm really pushing it, right? I've brought up evolution, now I'm bringing up abortion. We're just getting started, don't worry. But it was an interesting topic that she brought up because she worked with thousands of people and she asked them a very simple question. Is the right to an abortion, do women have the right to an abortion? Simple question, right? And she got 3 answers. She got the answer yes, the answer no, and the answer yes. Now you might think that's 2 answers, but the key was the backstory behind the yes or the no. And what we found, what was found by this woman Carol Gilligan, is that the first group said yes, but their reason for saying yes was, well, because I say so. That's the right thing. You should get to do what you want, and that's the right, it's your body, you get to do it. Just punch my lighting there. You get to do what you want, and that's right. And so, yes, women should have the right to an abortion. And that was their statement. Now, the person that said no typically would say no, and they would say because, and then they would say it's the rules of society, or it's the law, or the Bible says so, or God says so, or my pastor told me, or my mom told me. But there was a reason behind the no was because of some sort of societal or a structured, organized reason it was given. It was a framework of no. Now, the third group would say yes, but only in certain circumstances. It depends on the circumstance whether women should have the right to an abortion. Now, these are 3 completely different answers. But what's fascinating is Carol Gilligan found this really interesting dynamic. It's that when she polled people on what they had said in the past, they always, across the board, there was a progression, a direction across these 3 answers. You see, people in their earlier maturity tended to say, yes, because I say so, almost always. Now, people that then matured tend to then gradually shift towards saying, no, I don't think it is right because of X, Y, or Z, religion, God, society, my upbringing, my family values, whatever it is. And ultimately, most people, given the time to grow and develop, ultimately said, well, yeah, I guess in some circumstances, you know, in a life or death circumstance, or maybe in this circumstance of rape or whatever the example. I'm sure people had different examples of what they decided were right, but they would say, well, it's more complex, isn't it? So yeah, I would say yes, they should have a right based on some of these criteria. Now, what's interesting about it is not that there were three answers. What's interesting is that the three answers mapped on a trajectory. You could track that people grew in a development, that as they grew, as their worldviews expanded, as they grew in the way they think and how they see life and their spirituality, their relationships and their education, they moved from yes, because I say it, no, because someone else says it, yes, but only in certain circumstances that I'm going to rationally kind of work through and develop and get to. And so that was the trajectory. Now, I'm not saying anything about abortion. I've got my own opinions on that. Of course, I'm sure you do. But I think it's an example of how we can see that people go through stages. What she found was that no one went the other way. No one went from saying no, because of this set of values, to yes, just because I say so, it should. And no one went from saying, yes, it's a very complex and nuanced situation, so not always, but yes, I think in general, like there are circumstances. No one went from that to saying, no, the Bible says so, or no, because of my family values, or anything like that. It always went in one direction. And this is how the stages work. You don't see teenagers becoming small children again. You see teenagers becoming young adults. They move in that direction. And so as we look at these stages, you're going to see that you have to keep moving in a certain direction. Now, why do I say that? The reason I say it is, generally speaking, the stage that's 2 steps ahead of where you are right now is going to be much more attractive than the next stage. It's going to be much more attractive, generally, not always, okay? There's one exception to that, but generally speaking, you're going to want to skip the next stage, because this next stage is usually very different. It's got very different ideals, it's got very different values at times, and so you're going to really fight against it. And also, what's interesting is you're almost always going to identify a few stages ahead of where you are. And so as we go through the stages, it's very likely you're going to think you're further ahead than you are. And I say this especially as we look at this introduction. Don't look at the introduction and presume, based on a few words I've said, oh, I must be at that stage. It's very unlikely that that is the case. Once you go a bit more in depth in the stages, you're probably going to find, oh, actually, this is a bit more murky than I thought, and I might be a bit further behind than I thought. And again, this is not about right or wrong. It's not about bad or good or better or worse. So when I say behind or ahead, you have to forgive my language. I'm just meaning that there's a progression, that in the progression you have not moved as far as you might want to or think you should have. It's natural for us to want to be as far along. If we see a scale, we want to think we're at the end. We want to think we're done. We want to think we're the best. And so even when I go through the stages, you might go, oh yeah, I recognize that stage, and that's, yeah, I've moved beyond that. And I might, oh yeah, I've moved beyond that. And oh, I might have a couple bits of that, but I've moved beyond that. And when we get to the stage we are, one of the reasons you'll find that you're at, that you know that you're at the stage you're at, is when you get to a certain stage, you go, well, this is rubbish. That's absolutely nonsense. That's not how it works at all. As soon as you start feeling like that, you've just found what stage you need to move to. That's the next stage for you probably. And you are not going to like it. It is going to be really uncomfortable, and you're going to potentially get very angry. In fact, I'm very hesitant about this series. I actually am a little nervous at how it will be received. I think it's going to really be a big struggle for a lot of people. It was a big struggle for me to process this and accept some of it. And so that's all I'll say on that part. Now, here's something that's really important as well. As with any stage, theory, any model of psychological development, it is flawed. It's not perfect. If you take this to be 100% thus saith the Lord, or, you know, this is the absolute flawless scientific model that cannot be misproved or cannot be slightly changed or work, you are going to have a bad time. It's not to be taken like that. It's a model. It's a loose system for you to get a rough idea of where you're going and how you're progressing. Don't treat it like some sort of perfect, pristine, finished model. Like I said, we don't even know what later stages might be. And so we're still unfolding this. We're still working it out, okay? And so it is limited, and it will ultimately fall apart if you pick at it too much, okay? So hold it lightly, but value it for what it can be used for developing yourself, for helping you connect with others and relate to others, okay? Something that's really important is that as we look at the fact that the spiral dynamics isn't hierarchical, it's important to recognize sometimes people are going to be at a different stage, a lower stage, a prior stage, an earlier stage, whatever word helps you feel less hierarchical about it. Some people will be at an earlier stage and you're going to want them to move to your stage. You're going to want them to be better and right and later on in the stage and more developed, more mature, whatever language you might think as you look at it. But the truth is, where people are is helpful for them. It's good. They need to be there until they work out the stage to its fullness, until they get to the end of that stage and are ready to push through. Until you're hitting the ceiling, you are not ready to move on. And actually moving on early is not, while it might appear possible, you might intellectually be able to do it, you're not going to be able to experientially engage with that and move on, okay? Now, there are things called altered states, okay? Now, people experience altered states in many ways. We see it throughout the Bible, people having visions and dreams and God visiting them and all sorts of things. Or we might see it in a more quote-unquote worldly sense, people taking psychedelic drugs or having trances and different things like that. When people have an experience that is much later on. And so maybe they have an experience that makes them think differently. You might think of Peter has an altered state where God visits him in a dream and teaches him about including the Gentiles. And that's a later, more mature stage. And he has this altered state that, wow, this is an inclusive world. And he comes back. Now we know after that he had some real issues with including Gentiles, right? Paul called him out on it. He would sit with Jews and not the Gentiles and things like that. But it did move him forward. He did go into Cornelius' home and meet with them and eat with them and different things like that, okay? And he ate, unclean meat and all sorts of different things, okay? And so you might at times have encounters, experiences, altered states that push you beyond where you are. And so it's not to say that this is a rigid thing. Once you're in one stage, you can't experience anything beyond it. You can't do anything beyond it. In fact, what's interesting is very few people are ever, in fact, I would go as far to say is no one is ever 100% at any stage. More people than most will probably be about 50% a stage, and they'll be about 25% a stage before and about 25% the stage after, because we're constantly moving and evolving and growing in many ways. And so how you see your faith might be at a certain stage, but actually how you see your work and how you see your relationship and how you see sex and how you see money and how you see whatever it is, kids and your relationships with them and whatever it is, you might see different things at different stages with different frameworks, with different psychological lenses. And so try not to be too boxed in and be too literal. Be aware that you are going to find, as you look through these stages, you're going to find parts of you at different stages. And that's okay. That's good. That's great. And that's evidence of growth and development, okay? The last thing I'll say is that intellectual knowledges of stage do not equate to having grown to them, okay, or through them. So one of the stages, color is orange, the name is modern. It's a very intellectual stage. And so because this is an intellectual stage, it can grasp a lot of what I'm going to teach in this stage, but it will think it's much further along because it can grasp later stages. In its mind, it can understand that. But actually it hasn't been through the later stages. It's still stuck in that intellectual stage. It's still stuck in that, that period. And so be aware of that, especially as I'm going through stages. If you go, oh yeah, I can recognize a lot of orange in me, a lot of stage modern, be aware that you might think you're much further along than you are. And we live in a rational world, especially a lot of my audience are very rational, they like facts and figures and data. And so be aware that you may well be, I would say a good portion of people watching this will be at that stage. A very high percentage of people watching it will be at that stage. And so be aware of that, okay? Don't fall into a trap, okay? Because it's very easy to do. So in this series, we're going to look at all the different stages. Now, in each of the 6 stages, hope you're keeping with me, okay? I promise we're probably about 3/4 of the way, 2/3 of the way done, okay? So, and then we'll get into the real meat of it and we'll get into the real teaching. But I just want to give these frameworks because it's so important that you understand what we're doing and how we're going to do it. But that's the original kind of introduction done. I'm just going to tell you what the stages are going to look like and how we're going to do it, okay? So each of the 6 stages we're going to look at some key values and expressions Okay, so what does it, what at each stage, what do you value? What do you love? What are you about? What's your language? What gets you up in the morning? You know, that's really going to help you identify, is this a stage? Is it a stage I used to be at, or is it a stage I'm at now? Or maybe it's a stage that I'm not yet going to be at, or not yet at and I need to be at. And we're going to look at some examples. So I'll give you some examples, maybe people, maybe groups of people, maybe churches or movements within Christianity, or different faiths. That will be really helpful as well for you identifying where you're at, and it might be very helpful for you interacting with some of those groups or some of those types of people. We're going to look at some basic facts and figures about the stage, and we're going to look at the pros and the cons, because like I said, every stage is important for the stage it's at, for the people that are there, but it's also got its problems. Every stage has its problems. Even the latest stage that we are aware of has problems. We just don't really fully know the problems, and we don't know what the next stage will be that will evolve and expand beyond those problems and ultimately create a few new problems. Okay, so we're going to look at the pros and cons, and that's going to be really helpful as well. And I want you to pay attention especially, right? It's going to be really easy for you to look at the prior stages and look at the cons and go, I've done them, I know all the problems, that's why I'm not that anymore. But look at the pros and ask yourself, have I taken that? When I've transcended, have I included those pros? Have I brought them with me? And when you look at the current stage you're in, and you look at these pros and cons, I want you to be thinking, what are the cons of my stage? Yeah, I'm aware of all these pros and I love being where I am in life, but actually, what are some of the limitations of being where I am today? Because when you recognize these limitations, it's going to challenge you, it's going to push you, you're going to hit that ceiling sooner and more effectively so that you can break through the ceiling. And so that's really important. And I want you, as you look at the later stages, you're going to see the cons. You're going to look at it. And so you might look at a later stage and think, oh, well, that person, yeah, they're just like that. And I know that kind of person. And you'll look at the cons and you'll think, yeah, that proves everything I've said. But actually, there's a lot of pros in there. And a lot of the pros are answers to your cons. They're answers to your weaknesses. They're going to help you develop and grow. And so yes, there's problems. There's problems at every stage though. You have to get over that. You can't fixate on it. You've got to let go of the weaknesses of each stage, and you've got to move through and transcend and include, okay? So beyond that, we're going to then look at the transformational dilemma. Now, every stage has a transformational dilemma because we don't like to change. We don't like to grow. We don't like to get to a new stage of development. We don't like things to change. We don't like it. And so we'll look at what are the dilemmas at each stage that people have to come to terms with in order to move on. They're going to be very diverse and unique for each stage. And so it's going to be really helpful if you find the stage you're at, but it's also going to be really helpful if you're working with people at certain stages to go, oh, that's going to be their transformational dilemma. I need to help them come to terms with that kind of thing if they're going to keep growing. And so that's really helpful for people as you work with people that you love and want to help them and nurture them as they grow. We're going to look at how to work with different stages. So if you're at a stage, we're going to talk about how you might interact with some of the other stages. How might you deal with them? How might you connect with them? That's going to be really helpful, and it's going to make a big difference in your interpersonal relationships, okay? Because earlier stages really struggle with connecting with people at different stages than they do. They really work great working with myself. Some of them even struggle to do that. But on the whole, it's going to really help you figure out, how do I connect with people differently, different to me? How do I relate to them? How do I work with them in a healthy, productive way? And then finally, and I think this is going to be the area that most of you are most interested in, but we need all of that prior stuff to then figure out this part. We're going to look at areas of spirituality. We're going to look at, what does this stage think about these different areas of spirituality? And so we're going to talk about the Bible, we're going to talk about God, we're going to talk about Jesus, we're going to talk about the mystical, we're going to talk about heaven and hell, we're going to talk about prayer and worship, sin and salvation, and the kingdom of heaven. And so as we look at these different topics, what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to go, oh, at this stage, this is how they see it, this is how they perceive it. It's going to be very, very helpful for you to understand where you are. It'll be really good at putting the finger on the button and going, oh, that's where I am. Because you'll look at the next stage and you will not like it. And you'll look at the prior stages and think, that's such a backwards thinking or old school thinking or whatever you might think, but you're going to look down on the prior stage and you're going to really resent the future stage. But you're going to look at your stage and go, yeah, well, of course, that's how you look at things. That's the right way to see things. And so it's going to be really helpful there. And it also is going to give you a bit of a roadmap again of, where am I going? How am I going to move forward? How is this going to develop? And so it's really key that you pay attention to those stages and you try to suppress the negativity, rejection. Stay open-minded. Stay willing to experience, to grow, to develop. Stay aware that this is natural. This is the way things go. It's not someone trying to trick you or con you into a certain way of believing. I personally have no agenda what stage you're at or what stage you get to. I just want you to help you realize where you are and help you grow in that, in a healthy and meaningful way, in the time frame and at the pace that you need to grow. Okay, so I'm not here trying to get you to stage 5 or 2 or 4 or whatever else. Okay, that's not what I'm about, and you won't find that from me. I have no agenda here. As much as I can be agendaless, I'm trying, okay? So I probably have at times my own judgmental thoughts and desires and things like that, but I really am genuinely trying not to in any way press upon you a need to be at a certain stage. I think it's just not helpful, and you'll find as we go through sessions and we talk about that more, why that's not particularly helpful. Okay, so we're gonna wrap up by talking very briefly about the 6 stages we're gonna look at, okay? And this is just to give you a really quick look at it, okay? We're not going to go into depth. You might get really offended or really upset, or you might think, obviously, or whatever it might be, okay? But this is just to give you a taster of what each stage looks like and how they progress. And then we're going to have the more in-depth videos, okay? So this is going to be like 2 minutes to 5 minutes on each stage, okay? So it's not going to be long at all. But what we're then going to do is we're going to have an individual talk on each stage that is much longer, you know, an hour long, going into depth and how it looks and how it works and how we can work with it and how we can apply. So don't take too much stock in the stage. I just want you to understand the overarching. So when I go in and look at the first stage, I want you to understand that there's more stages and what's going to happen. So you don't just pick a stage, listen to it out of context and have no idea what the overall trajectory, what the overall pattern or path or journey is going to look like. Okay, so the first stage that we're going to look at, okay, it's technically the second stage after the first stage, archaic or beige. The second stage, and these colors are from Spiral Dynamics, they're from Beck and Cohen. Great researchers. They work largely off a person called Claire Graves, who he was a researcher in Australia and did incredible work outlining what became spiral dynamics. And so I'm leaning very heavily on a lot of people here, like Ken Wilber, Leo Gura, Don Beck, Cohen, Claire Graves. There's so many people here. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of incredible psychological development and developmental psychologists, sorry. And so you'll have to forgive me. Of course, I'm stealing bits from all of them, and I want to give them as much credit as possible, but just trust me, and I'll post links to different resources from them in comments and things below. But generally speaking, we're going to use the spiral dynamics language and a bit of Ken Wilber's language as well, and maybe Claire Graves as well. So with the labels, I'm going to give you a few terms, and we'll probably use them here and there in different ways as it's helpful. But the colors is how I'm going to primarily try and refer to it, because largely a lot of the terms have a connotation, right? So if I told you that this stage is called magic or tribal, you think, oh, magic, pff, that's crazy. Or some very religious people might, oh, magic, that's demonic, or whatever. Or tribal, some people think, oh, tribal, oh, it'd be wonderful to be like a tribe in the Amazon. Or they might think, oh, tribal, pff, that's stupid, tribal stuff, you need to be in a city. Or, so we have connotations with different labels. And so that's why we go for color. Initially, is to try and remove those connotations and just have a neutral label. Now, of course, we're then going to go, oh, purple, oh, that's magic, or that's tribal, or whatever. So we're still going to do it, okay? But that's why I'm going to give you a few different labels. Okay, so purple is typically known as magic or tribal, and it's a period of great mystery. Okay, so you think of early tribes, or maybe even today tribes in the Amazon. They don't know how the world works. They don't know science. They don't have an understanding. When the sun goes down, they're genuinely concerned that it might not come up, that the moon god is fighting the sun god and it's winning right now, and hopefully the sun god starts to win again for tomorrow and it will come back. Things like that. Very, very magical, very supernatural. And this has a knock-on effect into the way that they do society. So they have supernatural leaders. So their leaders are magical or powerful. There's a shaman, or if there's a king or something, he's picked by God and he's magical. He's got powers, superpowers, things like that. They have supernatural texts. If they have any texts, they're very magical and powerful. In a sense, everything is spiritual, but I don't mean in a positive sense, in a sense, okay? So we might look at everything as spiritual as quite an enlightened position where we go, oh yes, there's a great spirituality to everything. But I mean everything is spiritual in that if they stubbed their toe, it was probably a demon. Or if they find some money, oh, well, it was the gods because I did, I harvested my grain in the right way, or I sacrificed my daughter the day before. They're looking for demons in every bush, and they make a god for everything, okay? And so that's what I mean when I say everything is spiritual. They can't rationally figure out anything. So something like the sun and the moon and how we spin around the sun and the moon spins around us, they don't know that. So that's all spiritual. There's a sun god, there's a moon god. Or if there's just one god, he's literally like, pulling them with strings. Or it's a very, very basic understanding. And so there's a lot of pros to this though. They are very loyal. They're very loyal to one another. They're very stable as a group. They have great dynamics within the group. They're very loyal to one another. They're stable. They are very powerful in their relational elements with one another. It's very, very good. And a lot of people overly romanticize that, right? We all wish we could go back and live in the forest almost, which obviously wouldn't work with 7 billion people. So things have changed. It'd be very hard. I'm sure if we put ourselves back in the forest now, we'd probably have destroyed it in about 10 minutes. We'd be all looking for a Wi-Fi signal on our phone. And so, things have changed, but there is a lot of good that came through the tribal stage. If we looked at beige, which was just screaming and screaming and screaming, I want my food, I want my diaper changed, whatever. Well, tribal is the next stage. It's becoming a toddler and realizing, well, I have to communicate. It's a very early toddler that learns to say no or yes, or food, or pee-pee. It says mama, dada. It recognizes there is a mum. And if I talk to mum, I might get things much easier. I might have my way a lot more effectively. If I work with the group, it's going to go a lot better maybe. And so it's an early development, but it's better than just completely being archaic and independent. If we were to look at archaic and think how might that work in society, you would look at a very early baby. You might think of maybe someone that had very heavy developmental issues with maybe mental health. Or maybe someone that had senile issues. Maybe someone that's senile might be operating at that kind of stage where they can't communicate their needs anymore. They can't function in society as well. They might be a bit earlier, but generally tribal are very functional in a sense. They can communicate to some degree. They just see the world with magic. And again, early toddler, everything is magical to them. They don't understand anything. They're constantly asking why, what is going on? And they do, they have a awe and wonder at everything. And so, yeah, that's where they're at. These people are generally heavily motivated by fear. So they're terrified of things going wrong because they don't understand why things go wrong. So that's why they have demons and gods that are in charge of those things. And they're very, very motivated by powerful people. They assume powerful people that do know what's going on, they must be picked by the gods, or maybe they are gods and they are powerful. And if we just listen to them, if we just follow them, everything will be fine. And this group is very we focused. It's all about the group. It's all about working through the group. Now it's deeply selfish because it's all about me, but I need this we to survive. So it's still very, very selfish. It's not an altruistic focus on the group. It's very selfish focus on the group. It's if this group doesn't survive, I don't survive. If this group is weak, I will die. It's that kind of mentality. Okay, the next stage is called stage red, okay? And it's typically known as stage warrior. Okay, so warrior is very egocentric. Warrior is, I will hit you on the head and take that thing I want. It is, I will take power by my strength. It is, might is right, okay? So if someone is in power, they obviously are right. They obviously are pleasing the gods. They are obviously, they're obviously doing something correct. Power is never taken badly. It's not taken through some negative means. No, it's because they are right. They operate heavily through violence, through power, aggression. Control is a very key theme to this stage. And so this might all sound very negative, but this is all actually ego development. It's learning to be an individual. It's quite greedy in a sense. It's quite selfish. But actually, it's a bit like the early toddler learning to scream his head off and say, no, I don't want to do what everyone wants to do anymore. I want my own way. And, it's that that wrestling with his own identity. It's learning I'm an individual. Yeah, there's a group of us, but I want to be an individual. I want to have my own way sometimes. Why can't I get what I want? Why can't I have more than that person? And so it's a wrestling with that. And we'll see how that operates in culture, in religion, in society, and how it operates in individuals as we look into this stage a bit more. But one of the things that is heavily relied on this stage is a fear of God, is a fear of the powerful person. So it reflects, as the person that is most powerful is feared, everyone fears the most powerful God. So it's a very heavy focus on fear of God. So a lot of religions that are very, very fearful of God actually are at a warrior stage. You see, warrior stage might be the church operating in the Crusades. You know, might is right. We will conquer you, we will kill you all, or you convert. And that's how we'll know whose God is the most powerful. You look at the early Israel, right? We will conquer and kill every man, woman, and child, and then we'll know whose God is the best. And that's how things were seen. It's not an eye for an eye, it's a life for an eye. You cause me to lose my eye, I will kill you. And that again is prior to Moses' law, which corrected that. You know, Harambe's law was an eye for a life. You know, if you were better than someone and they caused you to lose your eye, you had the right to kill them. Under Moses' law, it's an eye for an eye. No one is better than anyone. We're all equal. Okay, this stage is very me focused. So we've gone from we of tribal to me of warrior. Now then we go and we swing back to we, and we go into stage blue. Now stage blue is called traditional, or sometimes fitting in, okay? Now traditional is where we start to see, probably in today's society, we're seeing a lot more people that are blue. We probably wouldn't see many purple or red, you know, not many very tribal or warrior stage in our day-to-day cultures in the West, at least. And so what we have is fitting in. Now this is the majority of the world. I think about 55-60%. I'll get the data for the later episode, but a good portion of the world is stage blue, is stage traditional. This stage is birthed from the uncertainty and the chaos and the aggressiveness and the power and the violence that comes from the prior two stages. And what it is it's birthed for a need of safety, of certainty and security. If you could sum up stage traditional, stage blue, in 3 words, it would be safety, certainty, and security. Okay, so it's all about those things. The individual finds their value in the group. They find their value in having a role in the group. So this is, if we look across societies and the evolution of humanity, we look at, this is coming out of warlords and tribes that are ran by a warlord, because stage tribal looking for followers tend to follow a warrior stage. So someone that is actually more advanced in that sense, that has grown, they end up leading a lot of the tribal stage. But ultimately people move on. They need some security, some certainty, some structure, especially as civilizations grow. So once you get 1 million people, say in the Babylonian Empire, someone has to write some laws down, and someone has to make sure those laws are kept, and there needs to be police, there needs to be consequences, there needs to be less individualism and more group dynamics, more value for the group, for the community, for the civilization. So it's very much a civilized focus, civilization focus, religion focus, but it's my civilization, my religion, my group. So it's more expansive than just a tribe. And so we've gone from the we, that is small tribe, to me, that is just me, to we, but it's expanded. It's not just a small tribe now, but it is still exclusive, sorry. It's just my group still. So it's still my country, or my religion, or my group, my family. It's still very insular. It doesn't see beyond itself, okay? And so we see that in a lot of ways in this world today. You know, countries can be fighting with each other, not recognizing, well, across that border, that invisible line that doesn't actually exist, the human on the other side of it is just a human like me. They have the same blood, the same organs, their skin might be slightly different color, but at the same time of the day, they're the same person in a lot of ways. You know, in fact, if I'd been on that side of the border, I would be them, and they might have been me. And that's the only difference, is where we were born, maybe. But that can't be seen very well at stage blue. We are very isolated. We see ourselves, our religion, our civilization. It's very morality focused. It needs structure. It needs rules. So morality is a huge focus at this stage. It requires respect for those that have been put in charge. People that are put in charge are always put in charge by a higher power. So it's a god or it's a birthright. So the king is not a king because he's the best person for the job. The king is because he was chosen by God. And then the next king is chosen by God, or it's just the king's son because, well, it's just in their blood. That's not, it's not interesting to this society what democracy says, who's the best for the job. It's interesting to this society, who did God put in charge? This society is very focused on a God that's in charge, a Bible that's in charge, a pastor or a priest or a pope. It needs a powerful figure like a king, someone that is in charge to divvy out and make sure that there's an area of responsibility. This stage loves theocracy, okay? So even though there are places in this world that are very blue, very traditional, and actually have a democracy, the heartbeat is very much for a theocracy. And so you might see this in certain parts of America that glorify a God's chosen leader. There might be a democracy where, well, it depends on who everyone votes for, but the wish, the heartbeat in it is, yeah, but it'd be best if it was the person God chose, right? We want the person God chose. And so there's still this desire and this way of seeing things that we want a theocracy, not a democracy. So almost the democracy is almost an allowance. But really, we don't want it. We'd rather just have God pick a leader, put him in charge, and we'll do what God says. And that's traditional. Okay, we're getting there. Don't worry. You're almost there. You're doing really well. We probably had a few pauses anyway, but I've had none. I tell you, I'm still pumped. I'm loving it. So the next stage is stage orange. Now, this is where I actually think most of you will be. Now, please don't assume this. You might not be. Like I said before, you're going to find when I start going through these stages, you're going to find you might get more and more offended as I go. And you might find, oh, I don't like that stage. Now, most people that follow me are going to be orange because in large part of the process of deconstruction is to move into stage orange. Now, stage orange is very small representation in the world still. It's not huge. I think it's about 15 to 30%. It's not a massive amount, okay? It's more represented in the West, but it's still a fairly low amount, okay? So just because you're orange, or just because I think you're orange, doesn't necessarily mean you are. There's still, the odds are stacked against you. But it is a possibility, and I think that most of you watching will probably be somewhere between blue, orange, and the next level green, but very few of you I think will probably be there. I don't know if I am, to be honest. I'm very orange in a lot of my thinking. So stage orange is called stage modern. Okay, so that we think of this is the Enlightenment, this is the scientific discovery, it's rational thinking, it's success, it's individualism. So we've swung from the we of the prior stage, traditionalism, we've gone back to me. It's about individuals, it's about, well, we can think, what if I think? I don't mind what God says if the earth is round or flat. What do I think? I can use my rational process, I can speak to scientists, I can look at the data, I can come to a conclusion on this. And so it shifts to an individualistic perspective. It's very big on success and becoming great, and it can be at times very greedy. It can be capitalistic in the best and the worst sense of the word. It is very tolerant. It becomes a lot more tolerant of everyone because everyone is an individual. We'll let them be individuals. Who cares what God they worship or whatever? This is about individuals going on a journey. A lot of people shift towards agnosticism or atheism as they grow. And so most Christians, and I would count myself in this, would see this as a negative thing. We'd see this as a backsliding, as a going backwards as far as development goes. But actually sometimes this can be a forward momentum because we're starting to think about things and rationally interpret and think for ourselves, well, what do I really believe? And so actually, if you really don't believe it and you come to the conclusion of atheism, it's actually a step forward because you at least are honest with where you are. It's not that you've lost faith with God. You've actually probably never really truly believed in that God in a real sense. And certainly as you've grown in your psychological development, it's just not compatible. And so there may be, as we go on, you'll find there may be options for that to come back. So it's not maybe a permanent situation. And if it is a permanent situation, we might see it differently as we progress and grow anyway. But generally speaking, people that have come out of the church and end up becoming agnostics or atheists, generally speaking, if they're still there, they're quite often around the stage orange. The stage orange is very strong on democracy because every individual counts, right? And so this is where they move from wanting a more theocratic kind of order to a democracy. It's all about science, it's about doubt and skepticism, it's about excellence, we want the very best, it's about money and sex and materialism. And it generally will see religion as a crutch. It sees, because we see the prior stages as weak, and so it goes, oh, they're just backwards, they don't see things rationally and scientifically, so they just use religion as a crutch. We almost see if you're orange, you almost see every prior stage as a bit tribal. They don't understand, so they've just made everything a bit magic. And it can't really distinguish between more nuanced concepts of spirituality. At orange, it often sees every type of spirituality, whether it's more advanced or less advanced. It sees it all as a bit magic, voodoo, doo-doo, kind of ridiculous. And that's a very common thing at stage orange. So, like I said, you might be stage orange. That might sound quite good to you. If it doesn't, if you're feeling like, oh, I don't like that at all, you may be stage blue, and that's okay as well. It's great. But it's an idea of actually you might need to be looking at some of these topics. You might need to be looking at some more rational thoughts, learning to be more individualistic, learning to take your own views and ideas and personhood seriously. That might be some things you need to step into. Okay. Two left, okay, we're getting there. Stage green next, okay? So stage green is often called postmodern. Now, this stage becomes very relativistic. Wow, it's all a bit relative. You know, everything is subjective. You know, even you looking over there and seeing a wall, well, is there really a wall? You don't know that. It's just because you see it, but how do you know you see the wall, right? So things like that. Very postmodern thought, postmodern philosophy, all falls into this category of stage green. Okay, now it can be very pluralistic, it can be very globalist. Now we swung from the very small we of tribe to the me of ego, to the we of civilization, to the me of modern. Now you might see again, I want you to think of circles within circles, okay? So the me of orange, of this modern stage, is much bigger and more expansive than the me of warrior, right? So warrior would hit you over the head and take what you want. But the me of the modern stage would be much more nuanced. It'd be much more respectful of the society of stage, because it would still have stage blue thoughts in a lot of ways, right? It would recognize society, structure, rules. We can't just turn into animals, you know, it's really important. And so the same, we've moved into green, which becomes we again, but it grows again. And so it takes all these ideas of individualism and the importance of the individual, and it expands and it grows and it goes, well, we're all individuals. We're all, this whole world. Why am I, a Christian, better than a Muslim? Why I, a brown person, better than a white person or a black person? You know, why is that the thing? Why do I make that a thing? And so it starts to see every person as valuable. It's very globalistic. It's very compassionate. So it has great compassion for others. Now, the stage before was not so compassionate. It was very selfish. It focused on itself primarily. It's very environmental because it's got a very global view. It starts to see things globally. It starts to value global topics. It's relational. It's very focused on individuals and connecting with one another. It focuses on equality. Equality is a huge importance to this. It's very spiritual. Now, I want to say spiritual in quotations. It's quote unquote spiritual, because actually what we're going to find as we develop and we look through later stages, it's maybe not true spirituality. But what I mean by that is it opens itself up to spirituality again. So stage green will go, oh, I could learn from Christian texts and Christian tradition, but I could also learn from the Sufis. I could learn from Rumi. I can learn from Gandhi. I can learn from Hindu tradition. I can go read the Bhagavad Gita. I can go read, about Buddha and study Buddha. I can go and study atheist scientists. I can do it all, and all of it will inform me and speak to me. And so it can be seen, and it might see itself as very spiritual. And so if you've come out of this stage of rationalism and you're starting to explore a lot of spirituality, that might be a bit of a green side to you. Now, prior stages look on at green and go, oh my gosh, this stage is so liberal and, you know, it's wild and it has no real values. It doesn't nail itself down to anything. It just believes everything. And so there's all sorts of dynamics going on here. But we need to see that this is just a healthy progression of growth, of reintroducing different elements. There are faults at green. It can be too liberal. It can be too progressive. It can be progressive for the sake of progressive. It cannot be very rational. So even though it's included the rationality of orange and moved on, sometimes it rejects a lot of that rationality because it demonizes what it came from. So it associates science as being negative, even though plenty of science needs to be brought with it to be built on. And so a lot of green thought sometimes embrace things like herbal medicines and all sorts of different things like Reiki and different things. And some of it is good and some of it is not good. And what you'll find is green really struggles to distinguish again between pre-rational and post-rational spirituality and mysticism. It just lumps it all together and accepts it all. It likes everything and accepts everything. So it's a very interesting dynamic, green. Now, we're going to move on to our final point, okay? The last one we're going to look at, last stage is stage yellow, and it's called integral. Integral is integral because it becomes aware of the whole spiral. It's the first stage of tier 2. It is the first point where it goes, oh, this is what we're doing. Oh, there's a growth, there's a direction, there's a momentum to this. We're going in a certain direction. Interesting. It can start to look through its prior stages and be more aware of what it's taken from it and how it's developed it. And it can relate to the prior stages more healthily. It creates a lot of nuance and complexity. It sees a lot of nuance and complexity. So when it looks at solutions, it understands, well, actually, there's going to be stage blue people here. There's going to be stage orange. There's going to be stage green. And actually, we need to work a system that it works for everyone, that helps everyone develop and grow and feel safe and secure. And it's a chameleon stage. So stage yellow people are often known as chameleons. In fact, there's probably, they estimate about 1% of the population in the world are yellow. Okay, so a very small percentage. Now, hear me right again when I said this. If you're orange, and a lot of you are, you're going to think you're yellow. Okay, you're almost certainly. I want to think I'm yellow. I really do. Please help me be yellow. So I keep thinking that, but I know I'm quite orange, if I'm honest. I probably have about somewhere between 10 and 20% of me is maybe yellow, if I'm lucky. Please help me, Lords, grow and develop. You know, so I'm very self-aware that I am not there, but it's taken me a lot of time. When I first studied this, I was like, oh yeah, I'm very yellow. And so be aware of this, okay? And you're going to discover this. The more we go into the in-depth sessions on each stage, you're going to go, oh yeah, I'm not very yellow, or oh, actually, yeah, I'm very orange. So just be aware of that, okay? But generally speaking, because yellow are chameleons, because they understand the stages, they relate to people at the stage they're at. And so if you're stage blue, you actually might think a yellow is blue. If you're a stage green, you might think a yellow is green, because they're going to come and relate to you in ways that help you in language that you like and you understand. And so it's very, very hard at times to tell who yellow is until you take a step back and look at how they're interacting with everyone. The yellow is very meta. It's above and beyond looking down, kind of getting the big picture and trying to piece it all together. They love system theory and working on larger, broader systems. They focus on root issues. Now, most of the prior stages, when they deal with problems, they deal with surface problems. Stage yellow goes, yeah, these are problems, but actually if we dig a bit deeper, we'll find real root issues. Again, orange, you're thinking, I deal with root issues. I know about that. Okay, I know, trust me. But they love to deal with root issues in ways that even if you're orange and you think you deal with root issues, you probably don't. They work for the benefit of all stages. Now, this is a key element for yellow because they recognize that no stage is better than the other and everyone needs to be at the stage they are until they don't need to be, until they grow and transcend and include. They don't work for a world that works for yellow. Now, a green works for a world that works for green, right? So a green that wants to save the environment is going to make a orange who's very capitalistic and just wants to drill for oil. They're going to make them want to be green. You have to be green. And a blue that wants a God-given leader in charge is going to make a green give up their democracy and somehow have a God-given elected official. You know, so all these dynamics are going on, but they're very selfish. We want what our stage wants. Yellow looks at every stage and goes, I need you to be benefited by whatever system I create for society, however I move forward, however the religion I'm presenting, the politics, the relationships I have, it needs to work for every person based on where they are. And so it's a very, very nuanced thinker, and it's a very gracious position. It's a little bit like Paul saying, I can be a Jew to a Jew and a Gentile to a Gentile. I can become all things to all men. It's a very yellow statement, actually, very progressive of Paul. Yellows are non-manipulative. They have no desire to manipulate because they themselves understand that every person is at the place they need to be. So it doesn't feel the need to change that. So there's no manipulation in there. There's not a need for that. They have a long-term focus. They don't care about the short term. Yellows are playing a long game. They want to figure out things long-term. They're making big strategy positions. They tend to be in the background. They tend to prefer to be a bit quiet and reserved and just work on the big picture and help people implement that on the short term. Okay, they're very self-aware because yellows are aware of the stages. They know where they're at. They have a very strong self-awareness of it. They also know that they're not at the end because they're now aware of the stages. They now know, well, there's probably more ahead of me, and so they're very intentional about how to grow and how to develop in that sense. They are non-judgmental. They never judge because there is no right or wrong as far as where you are. So yes, you're blue and you might think very differently to me as a yellow, but that's not right or wrong. It just is. And so there's not a judgmental need. There's no need to judge whether someone is right or wrong in their place, in their belief, in their system, in their structure. It's actually very helpful for them. Now, as I'm saying all this, this is maybe really irritating you, and I'm okay with that. It's okay. I was irritated by some of this as well. Recognize that it just is. You can let it go. You don't need to believe this at this point. But I do want to encourage you that you are, if you're going to continue to grow and develop, you are going to need to wrestle with some of this stuff. But you might think, no, there is right and wrong, especially if you're in a stage of, you know, maybe blue. Some of you might still be in blue. You're going to really want, because it needs order and structure and right and wrong, and it needs morals, and it needs standards, and it needs all these things to be in place for us to function as a civilized society that makes me feel safe, secure, and certain. Now, you as yellow, you're going to swing away from the we that is very global. You're going to swing away back to a me. You're going to be very individualistic. So yellows tend to live very in their heads, okay? They're very thought conscious. They're constantly thinking, constantly building systems and structures. And again, this is why orange often thinks it's yellow, is because that's what orange does. So it becomes very individualistic, very thought, very rational, very much that. But it's a much deeper, more nuanced. It's much more caring and compassionate than orange was. Because it's taken all of that stuff from green. It has developed. It's still very global in its view. It's still very open and broad in its view. So there's all these different dynamics at play. It is caring, but it's now realistic. It assimilates both those orange and green elements, and with its knowledge of the spiral, its knowledge of stages, it grows and develops and goes, well, I'll be caring. I do care about everyone. That's really important. But I have to be realistic, and so I need to figure out a system that actually works. I can't just have a bleeding heart for every individual because I'll bleed to death. And so it's very aware of that. The final stage that we're not going to talk about in this series, I might revisit and do another video at some point, is a stage called turquoise, or post-integral, or transpersonal. Now, we're not even going to go into this. This swings back to a we on an even more broad spectrum, and it's very complex, and frankly, it's almost impossible for me to talk about right now because I just don't understand. It's too far beyond where I'm at. Now, if you're finding yourself, as you go through the whole process of this series and you find yourself at yellow, I'll post some great resources of turquoise people and things like that you can check out. But the people that are turquoise, it's estimated that it's probably 0.01% of the human population. Of the 7 billion people, 0.01% are estimated to be turquoise. It's so minuscule. And so, you know, count your chickens before you hatch kind of thing. Okay, right. What we're going to do is we're going to wrap up there, okay? So I'm going to finish up, but what I will say is take your time with this course. Take it
in your own time. There's no hurry, there's no rush. Like I said, you don't need to progress the next stage as quick as possible. You'll benefit from growing and developing and going through these stages, of course, but these are stages that take people decades to go through. And so please be self-aware that this is a process and it's going to take time, and it's okay to take time. Be open as you can to the fact that this is kind of a fairly well thought of structure and system, and over 70 individual systems have all been compared from different cultures at different times, and they all kind of correspond to this process. So there's a lot of data out there that says this is kind of the way you're going to go, and so you can fight it if you want, you really can, but I'd encourage you to at least be open. You know, trust if you believe that God is there and he can keep you safe, trust he'll keep you safe. Trust he won't allow you to be deceived by some crazy, weird, you know, rational, scientific thought process or anything like that. Be open to this process. I think I'd really encourage you to do so. Study outside this course as well. It's not just what I have to say. I'm trying to condense probably a few hundred hours, probably a lot more than that actually. I've been studying this intensely for about 3 years now. But I'm trying to condense it into a few hours. It's going to be a long and in-depth course, but it's very condensed. So study people like Ken Wilber, Claire Graves, Don Beck. Paul Smith is a great person. He wrote a book called Integral Christianity, which talks about how to go how all these stages look in Christianity, and how yellow, the final stage, might work. How might Christianity function if it was yellow? Very interesting book. I wouldn't encourage you to check it out yet unless you're at least stage orange. It's going to be really hard for you to accept. Even at those stages, you're going to find it very challenging and probably quite upsetting and annoying. James Fowler, of course, Stages of Faith. That was his model of psychological development. He made one specifically about stages of faith. Some seminaries and Bible colleges teach about that. Focus, as you go through this stage, focus at the stage you're at, okay? Don't spend too much time on other stages. It will help you relate to other people. It will help you know where you're going. It will help you know where you've come from. But ultimately, you cannot grow to the next stage until you fully assimilated and become that stage that you're in. Okay, so you can intellectually know about the next stage, but it's only when you really become and work through the prior stage that you're going to be ready to grow and develop through to the next stage. Now again, parts of us are at different stages, okay? So it's not that we fully 100% become blue before we can become orange, okay? Though if you're blue mostly 50, 60, 70%, there's probably a good part of you that's orange already. There might even be some of you that's red. It might even be some of you that's green. I know for me, I probably am still probably 50% orange, maybe about, I don't know, 20% green, and then maybe a little bit of yellow. I would say that probably my spread, probably about 20% yellow if I'm really lucky, probably realistically more 10% yellow and probably more orange than I think. But you know, it doesn't even have to be mostly in the center with a bit before and a bit after. It can be a bit spread. I think because of my knowledge of spiral dynamics, I've been pushing myself to move forward. But I'm dragging my heels because I really am very orange and I need to go through all of that. I need to really hit the limitations of it. And so don't rush ahead. Don't try and just perceive the future stages and think you've got there, okay? As best you can, try and let go of the resistance you have and be open to change, okay? I know I said that at the beginning, but please, as best you can, this is going to really help you, okay? If it's true, it's true. If it's not, it's not. You know, you don't have anything to lose from listening to this series or reading a few books with an open heart, an open mind, prayerfully considering, contemplating, meditating on these truths, considering them for yourselves, evaluating it amongst your friends and how your life works. It's really important that you stay open and you think about this rationally, because like I said, you are going to really dislike the stages before you, in front of you. And so you're going to really resist that. And so the more you can know that, be aware of it, and intentionally try and be open, the more you're going to allow yourself to grow. Okay, so yes, study the prior stages and see if you fully worked out all of those parts. There might be parts of you that haven't really got through red or blue or orange or whatever it might be prior for you. You might need to really figure that out and work it out and go through it so that you can grow and move those parts of you into future stages. But do focus on the stage that you're currently at. Okay, that's all I've got. Well done. You've really hung in there and I'm really impressed. I'll see you in the next video where we will look at stage purple. I think that's what I'm going to do next. I'm not entirely sure, but I think we're going to go right through the stages. So I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.